This means that the value of other coins was not monetary but material, because the function of money was reserved for the legal coin. Thus, the legal coin acquired a value which other coins could acquire only through the material of which they were made, and this justified its independence from any intrinsic value. Just as a quart measure has economic value, not because it is the product of material and labor, for if it were not useful for some purpose outside itself no one would want it, but because it is used for measuring, so too money has value because it serves as a means of measurement and in other ways. The fact that this value can itself be expressed only in money makes it less easy to recognize than the value of a quart measure, which can be expressed in terms other than itself. The services of money determine its use value, which must find expression in its exchange value. Money is one of these objects whose utility value, which depends upon the government. Monopoly of coinage includes its scarcity value, which this monopoly establishes. The theory of money as having a material value is opposed to the general trend of knowledge in which the meaning of things is transposed from their terminus a quo to their terminus ad quem. Money has value not on account of what it is, but on account of the ends that it serves, and although an original intrinsic value of money made possible its later functions, it acquires its value subsequently from these functions, and gains at a higher level what it had given up at an earlier stage. In the development that I have outlined, money tends towards a point at which, as a pure symbol, it is completely absorbed by its exchange and measuring functions. There are many parallels in the history of thought. Our original, untutored interest in phenomena usually comprehends them as undifferentiated wholes. They confront us as a unity of form and content, and our valuations are bound to the form because it is the form of this specific content, to the content because it is the content of this specific form. In higher stages of development, these elements are separated and the function as pure form is appreciated in specific ways. The diverse contents of these forms are often treated as irrelevant. Thus, for instance, we appreciate the religious mood while being indifferent to the dogmatic content. We consider it valuable that this elevation, striving and appeasement of the soul, which is the universal element in the many different historical creeds, should exist. Similarly, an exhibition of strength often elicits a respect which is denied to its consequences. Thus, a more refined aesthetic interest turns increasingly towards what is pure art in a work of art, to the form of art in the broadest sense, and is increasingly indifferent towards the material of art, that is, towards its theme and towards the feeling that originally inspired it. The sublimation and objectification of such feelings is the aesthetic function in both the production and the consumption of art. In the same way, we value cognition as a formal function of the mind which reflects the external world, regardless of whether the objects and results of cognition are gratifying or distasteful, useful or merely ideal. This differentiation of value feelings has yet another important aspect. The evolution of the modern naturalistic spirit tends to dethrone universal concepts, and to emphasize singular instances as the only legitimate content of conceptions. In theory and in practice, the universal is treated as something purely abstract which acquires meaning only in its material embodiment, that is, in tangible instances. In rising above these concrete instances, one seems to enter a void. Yet the sense of the significance of universals, which reached its climax with Plato, has not altogether disappeared, and we should attain completely satisfying relation to the world only if every aspect of our worldview reconciled the material reality of singular instances with the depth and scope of a formal universality. Historicism and a sociological worldview are attempts to confirm universality, and yet to deny its abstractness, to transcend the singular instance, to derive the singular from the general, without sacrificing its material reality. for society is universal, but not abstract. The valuation of functions as distinct from content has its place here. Function is universal in relation to the purpose that it serves. Religious sentiment is a universal by contrast with the content of a particular creed. Cognition is universal as against any one of its particular objects. Power is universal by contrast with the specific and varied problems to which it is always applied in the same way. All of these are forms and frameworks which comprehend a great variety of material. Money seems to participate in this trend when valuation becomes independent of the material of money and is transferred to its function, which is universal and yet not abstract. The valuation, which at first concerned a particular functioning substance, becomes differentiated, and while the precious metal continues to be valued, its function, which goes beyond the particular substance with which it is associated, attains a specific value of its own. The form in which money exists for us is that of mediating exchanges and measuring values. A metal becomes money by assuming this form, just as ideas about the supernatural become religion when they are incorporated into the function of religious sentiment, and as the block of marble becomes a work of art. When artistic creativity endows it with a form that is simply the expression in space of the artistic function, the refinement of the sense of the original dissolves the interfusion of function and allows each to develop as an independent value. It is true that the functional value of money still needs to be represented. The decisive point, however, is that its value no longer arises from what represents it. On the contrary, the latter is quite secondary, and its nature has no importance except on technical grounds which have nothing to do with the sense of value. Money and the sequence of purposes. Action towards an end as the conscious interaction between subject and object, the great antinomy in the history of thought, whether the contents of reality are to be conceived and interpreted in terms of their causes or their consequences, i.e. the opposition between a causal and a teleological approach, finds its original expression in a distinction within our practical motivations. The feeling that we call instinct appears to be tied to a physiological process in which stored up energies strive for release. The instinctual drive terminates when these energies find expression in action. If it is simply an instinct, then it is satisfied as soon as it has dissolved into action.